Welcome to Refresh. This is a time to connect, be inspired to learn something new, and ultimately feel better about ourselves and this time we spend together. How is everyone today? I have to let you know that our Generation W, Generation Wow team are just back, literally, early this morning, some of us, from a wonderful visit to Orlando, working with our fantastic partners, the Orange County Public School District, the eighth largest school district in the nation, may I add, and in the country, yes, for our annual Generation Wow event. Wow is our teen girl focused program whose ethos is the positive and the possible. And it's a leadership and mentorship program that continues to grow as we work closely with girls, hearing their voices, listening right to what they have to say, what they want, being present and supportive of them in their life's journeys. Yesterday was Generation Wow, the event. About 500 teen girls from high schools across Orlando and nearly 100 women mentors gathered. And I have to tell you, the energy was electric. And I think all of us are still reverberating. So as Sherry and I gathered earlier this morning, reviewing the events of yesterday and preparing for our remarkable guest today, Dr. Tania Israel, we're always grateful for the building of community, and that's what stays with us. Having people come together from all over, yeah, young girls and women, truly amazed at the, okay, is this a word, Dr. Tanya? Is this a word, eclecticity?
If it wasn't a word, it is now.
It's kind of cool, right? It's, it was so eclectic and it was electric. I think I'm going to try to get that word kind of entered into the lexicon. Anyway, women and girls from Guatemala, from Egypt, from Haiti, from the islands. And we created this segment a while ago called Me, We, Us. And it's all about how we view the world from a me perspective. And then we move out to a we perspective. And then, of course, ultimately, us. And it was about, let me just say, it was powerful, worldly, impactful. And ultimately, not only did the girls find it to be that way, but the women too, led by our senior WOW manager, Alexandra Kovis. Because it's so beautifully showcased that there is so much unity in how our values are aligned. The girls ultimately leaving feeling incredibly connected as they shared with me as we did the mentor walk and I stopped and talked to them. And yet even when we hear all of this divisive talk, there was so much hope from them, right? So hopeful in these times when we're told that this can't be possible or it isn't. And I guess Sherry and I said, oh my goodness, right? It brings us to today. We often ask ourselves how we navigate through the chaos of today's world by understanding the other side. And, how do we work through strategies to have those difficult conversations? But today, thanks to Dr. Tania Israel, we're going to focus on how we can find peace amidst the outside noise and also recognizing what is noise. Just so I can tell you a little bit about our guest, who we really do adore. She's a professor of counseling psychology at the University of California, Santa Barbara, an award-winning author of Beyond Your Bubble, and now she has a new book that's answering the question of how we can manage distress and navigate political polarization leading up to the upcoming election. It's called Facing the Fracture: How to Navigate the Challenge of Living in a Divided Nation. She has shared her expertise not only with Refresh back in 2020, but also today, the New York Times, TEDx, the Washington Post, NPR. It seems whenever we reach out to her, she's somewhere sharing her knowledge and her wisdom and a really kind heart. So, Dr. Israel, Tanya, thank you for being with us today. I know a lot of people are really excited about this conversation because I think we're all in that boat of wondering, right? What can we say and what can't we say?
Absolutely. This is such a fraught time. I mean, it was in 2020 when I was here, and it still is. And it seems like some things have amped up even more. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation because I think people are looking for guidance and looking for resources.
So where should we start? I think there's an amount of anxiety and angst, even
Mhm.
with your best friends, your family. Where do you cross? How do you draw the line? How do you just sit in your space and yet be open to the world that is filled with a lot of very, I guess, a pendulum of messages, some very harsh
Yeah.
and some that are easy to hear.
I think it's helpful for us to understand sometimes where our anxiety around this comes from. So I'm going to go back a few years. When humans evolved, we lived in small groups of people or tribes, and we needed to protect ourselves and our people, not just from the harsh environment, but also from the other tribes who were competing for scarce resources. So we really saw ourselves as being caring and protective, and we would see the other groups as being aggressive and hostile and a danger. So we are taking our brains that developed during that time, our old brains, and overlaying them onto our current political and social situation. So we're seeing people who are in our own group as being, we are protective, we are caring, we're benevolent, we're well informed, we're objective, and we see the people in the other group as being a threat to us and to others, and being misinformed and extreme and irrational. And so these cognitive biases that developed based on this old brain technology is really setting us against other people right now. So it becomes not just a disagreement about issues or perspectives; it becomes tribal warfare.
Oh, okay. So okay, let me just say what I hear.
I'll pause there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I got that. We have a brain formed, evolved thousands and thousands of years. It is comes out of tribal thinking, tribal
Hmm.
protection. We're
Hmm.
mapping over that tribal protection. So essentially, we're still living in a tribal mentality.
Yeah. Yes. And so you take that brain and then you feed it media and social media that focuses on conflict and division. And we really get the situation where we are so emotionally activated by people who have different views than we do. Um, but in reality, we are not as far apart as we think we are. Uh, we talk about right now, it's the most polarized time in recent history, and that's true. And at the same time, our viewpoints, our differences of opinion, what we call ideological polarization, has not increased that much over the years. What has increased dramatically in the last few years is what we call affective polarization. So that's the feelings that we have toward people on the other side of the political spectrum, the hostility that we feel, the mistrust that we feel. That has increased dramatically, such that people don't even want to live near, work with, or have a family member marry somebody who's in a different political party. And this is the part of polarization that's really most corrosive to our relationships and to our democracy.
Uh, Let me just, first of all, I just want to take a second there. That's incredibly powerful. I want to welcome everybody and let everyone know that being part of this conversation is special because we invite you to participate. So it is wonderful. We have a national leader and expert, Dr. Tania Israel, is with us. Please put your questions in the chat and we will engage them in this conversation. Take some pressure off me. I would love to hear what you have to say. And this is why we take such pleasure in the Generation W community. You talk about affective polarization. All of us have family members who we feel actually either angered by or we just don't want to connect with them anymore. How do
Mhm.
we, how do we, how do we move past that? It's my mother. Like, I hope she's on here, but like, we cannot have a rational conversation about these things.
Well, can I ask you a question? Like, what happens when you try?
Oh, she's adamant about her position. There is no movement other than what she believes and what she reads on the internet. And I assume that she's not alone. The impact of the internet as being a purveyor of total and absolute truth is frightening.
Yeah. And we're very aware of how other people are adamant and they're unmovable in their views. I mean, the truth is, probably we are too. Most of us, are feel pretty strongly about our values, or many of us do. So I ask people, what's your goal in having a conversation with somebody who has different political views? So I'll ask you, Donna. There's four answers that I hear to that, and you
Okay.
can tell me if any of these apply to you. Some people say there's somebody I'm close to who I want to maintain a connection with, but we're having trouble doing that because of our differences of view. Some people say I want to persuade or convince someone. Some people are looking to heal the divide or find common ground. And some people say, I simply cannot fathom how people can think or act or vote as they do. And I'm looking for some insight. So, do any of those apply to you and your motivations for having a conversation with your mother?
I think all of them. There are days I can't
Yeah.
fathom, there are days I'd like to persuade, but mostly where I
Hmm.
end up is I love her. And
Yeah.
okay, right? Okay. We have so many other ways to connect with each other. I am going to
Hmm.
put this aside. And I think that's
Yeah.
how she feels too. I mean, I think the day she told me that I embarrassed her as her daughter, I was like, really, Mom? Now that's really, really kind of out there, right?
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah.
Because
Well,
that I mean, we can really get there.
yeah. No, it gets very emotional. This isn't it's not a dispassionate kind of disagreement. We're really invested. No matter which of those goals you have, and especially if you have all of them, what you want to do is to create a warm, respectful connection with somebody where you are trying to understand them. What we often think we're supposed to do is try to get them to understand us. But to achieve any of those goals, like even if you're trying to convince somebody else, you don't want to lay out all the facts and figures. It turns out that's actually not the best way to convince people. The best way to convince people is to hear them, to give them time to speak, let them know that you heard them by sharing back something that you heard, and even ask them to say more, like ask them to elaborate. I know people are like, oh no, really? Do I have to ask for even more of what I really don't want to hear? But it's useful because I found that when I ask people more, the first thing that they're going to tell me is like the most recent headline or sound bite that they heard. And when I ask them to share more often, there's some more nuance or complexity to what their views really are, especially if I ask not about like, well, where did you get that information or something challenging like that? But if I ask, oh, how did you come to view things that way? Or tell me a little bit about what that phrase means to you. Then I get like much more three-dimensional human beings. So sometimes we have to dig a little bit. And then actually, when we're going to speak, rather than sharing stats and slogans, it's so much better if we share our own stories about how we came to view things the way that we do. Was there someone or something that shifted our views? And like, what are the values that we have connected to the perspectives that we have? So it's that's how we have a much more human conversation that's going to move us toward achieving any of those goals that we have.
I love that. Ask people more because it's amazing what you can learn. I'm just going to
Mhm.
mention here, thanks for all the conversation that's really starting to ramp up. Matt
Mhm.
Wolf, hi Matt. I don't try to change someone's mind. What I try to do is get others to acknowledge the difference between fact and opinion, right? We have a lot of misinformation, which is very damaging, countered by, and then Amy Laskin comes in and says, how can we create a respectful and compassionate conversation if we feel that positions are espousing are hurtful, hateful, and or dangerous, right? So we have misinformation that's just mis, but
Mhm.
then we have information that we feel actually is damaging and hurtful. So there's two different issues being raised here.
Yeah. So let's take each of those. Let's start with misinformation. So Americans are very concerned about misinformation, seeing it as like the number one problem of our current media environment. We're not concerned about misinformation that we're getting. We're really concerned about misinformation that the other side is being exposed to. It turns out that actual like misinformation or especially disinformation, that having intentionally inaccurate or misleading information, we're not exposed to that, and even they are not exposed to that nearly as much as we think. What we are exposed to and what we are choosing are narratives, small slices of information that are supported by facts that are consistent with that. And so it's not necessarily that it's inaccurate. It might be very much outside the information that we're paying attention to. So let me give an example of that. Um, let's look at what was going on during the pandemic about vaccinations. In the fall of 2021, vaccinations had been available for, 6 to 8 months. And the story about this that everybody heard was that there was a huge difference between Democrats and Republicans in terms of vaccination rates. Democrats were being vaccinated at 90%, rates, and 61% of Republicans were getting vaccinated. So by January 2022, when I wrote a piece about this and I looked at the numbers on the CDC website, I was like, well, this is really interesting because what I'm seeing is that 86% of Americans have gotten at least one shot of the vaccine. And I was like, wow, what a different story that is to say, in this moment of crisis, look how our country came together with just about everybody doing the thing that was going to support our health in this pandemic. But instead, what we heard is it's all about your identity. And, if you're in this political group, you are, this, you're not. And if you're not getting vaccinated, you're an anti vaxxer. And there are very few people who are true anti vaxxers. So, what this says to me, all of the information I gave you in statistics are absolutely factual. This is all factual information. But boy, are these two stories different, whether we're looking at being divided and focusing on anti vaxxers, or if we're saying, look how united we are and we've come together. What a difference does that make in terms of how we feel about each other, about our fellow Americans, and about what we might do in a time of crisis? So that's just an example.
It's a great example, and I'm sure you can take that example and bring it to so many different flashpoints.
Mhm.
My follow-up question to that is there seems to be a fraying of the guidelines, is it morals, whatever it is, about the very use of language. What's permissible and how language now is weaponized in such a way as you expressed. What
Mhm.
is that all about?
So that has to do with that affective polarization, with that animosity that we're feeling. So, and it also has to do with how we're expressing this. So often this is taking place on social media. A lot of the name calling of people is happening when we're not in an actual conversation with another human being. And social media makes it very easy to say things about people, to dehumanize people in various ways. It's funny because people talk about how social media makes us really hostile, but it turns out, looking at the research of like who posts about politics on social media, the people who post about politics on social media are just dispositionally angrier people than everybody else. So, and very few people are posting about politics on social media if you look at all the people using social media, but then a little bit of that gets spread by everybody else. And the best way to go viral, if you're talking about politics, is not to take a position on an issue, it's to say something negative about the people who disagree with you on an issue. That's where people are going to get really excited about what you're saying and spread that. So this is where we can really turn down the heat on this division by recognizing that these are our old brains that we're overlaying onto situations, that we have misperceptions of people on the other side of the divide, and that if we can not throw out that negativity about other people, like we can talk as much as we want about what the issues are and how we feel about them and how meaningful they are, but if we can do that without putting down people who disagree with us, I think it'll go a long way to helping to knit us back together.
And yet, a very essential part of our biology or whatever we want to call it is triggered, right? It's not
Yeah.
like it's not in your conscious mind, these triggers. They're out in your unconscious mind in
Yeah.
terms of how we're triggered by these conversations because, right? Does it go back to our brains? What do our brains do? They're there to protect us. And what
Hmm.
is that? It's either flight or fright.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so when we're fleeing or either fighting from
Hmm.
a tribe that we see as antagonistic to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that I think about this, yes, it is very tribal, and you're absolutely right about that fight, flight, or freeze response that we have. So you're confronted with somebody, or you're just talking with somebody who they share an opinion, or they say Black Lives Matter, or they say all lives matter, or whatever it is, and you feel flushed, your heart's beating faster, your breathing gets shallow, your muscles are tense. Yeah, that's that fight or flight. So, as a psychologist, like, we have spent decades trying to get people to trust their feelings. And what I've realized is like, oh, but our feelings are based in these old brains also. So it's not that we should ever disregard our feelings. It's important to know them, but I think it's important to take them as one point of information. So if we take this one point of information of our feelings and we say, "Oh, I am feeling a sense of threat here." And then you take more points of information because people say to me, sometimes they say, "Oh, I feel unsafe." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you're unsafe. How do we get you out of danger?" And they're like, "Oh no, I'm not in danger. I just feel unsafe." So it's a difference between feeling unsafe and being unsafe, or feeling unsafe and feeling unsettled is another way to think about it. So if we can recognize, like, am I actually in a dangerous situation or not? And take that point of information also. Say, okay, I'm feeling threatened, I'm feeling unsafe, but I recognize that I'm not actually in danger. Then I can say, oh, this is my old brain kicking in. So, I mean, if you are in danger, absolutely get out of that situation. But if you're not in danger, the best thing that we can do to build our own resilience is to calm our bodies, and to get out of that fight, flight, or freeze mode. So we can do that by taking deep breaths. So deep, we're all breathing all the time, but if we can do slow, deep breaths into our belly, if we just touch our hand, then that helps to physically ground us, or feel the chair under you or your feet on the ground. Any of these things are going to help. And just to recognize, I mean, I sometimes just say to myself, okay, this is not a saber-toothed tiger. This is a person who's disagreeing with me, maybe in a loud voice. And I can handle that. So the messages that we give ourselves around this make a difference too.
Big time, big time. Let me just say, Desiree, thank you for being here. We're going to come back to your question. I just want to welcome everybody to our Refresh Today, bridging difficult conversations, especially at a very, I would say, pivotal time in our country's history with an election coming up with the amazing Dr. Tania Israel, author. I should probably add one more time for you and for all of us, Facing the Fracture, How to Navigate the Challenges of Living in a Divided Nation. Now, we can start to calm ourselves down, but we know that that's not going to happen. And we know that these singular ideas build movements. And when they get to be movements, then they feel certainly like moving from a tribe to a nation, which feels a lot more threatening. And so I
Mm-hmm.
just want to hold that thought and just talk to Desiree. What's the best way to communicate facts over feelings without using those words? In other words, I guess what Desiree's saying, I don't want, here are the facts, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we can't actually change other people's minds. They can change their own minds. And the best thing that we can do is to create a setting where they might be more likely to do that. Setting ourselves up against other people, it's not going to do that. Having a warm relationship with someone, people say to me, they're like, I have a sibling who believes in conspiracy theories and I can't communicate with them. Well, if we communicate that we care, that we're interested, that we want to know more about what their experience is, but I think even knowing, like, oh, what is it that makes that belief appealing to you? Like, what is it about that that draws you? And learning more about that, it's not about laying out facts for them if that's not what they're asking us for. Like, if they start to believe that we care about them, they might start to be interested a little bit in what we have to say also. But we have to really invest first. So if we say, oh, I can't talk to any of my relatives who believe in conspiracy theories. Well, then we are leaving them up to create community with other conspiracy theorists. And that's going to do nothing but get them more and more entrenched in that. So, really, our relationships are important. And it's if we truly want to do something about it, we have to learn how to tolerate that difficulty so that we can be there for them and frankly for our country as a whole to try to hold us together.
Right. There is that, right? We're going to go from the me and the we, and then ultimately to
Mhm.
the us. And we need to think about that us. Amber says, if you, people you know, only watch one news channel, right? So it's a consistent stream of the same kind of threads.
Mhm.
How do you overcome the constant flow of division and what that division can create, which in some cases can be hatred. She says, I believe there are dangerous situations and silence is dangerous. And she's looking for some guidance.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that the answer is to, ignore things that are going on. I think it's helpful to know what's happening. Let me address the feeling of danger and fear specifically in this moment. We've got, less than 2 weeks leading up to the election. Over 70% of the American public is worried about violence in the aftermath of the election. Several studies have come out recently. Most like yesterday, the American Psychological Association's Stress in America study found that same statistic. So I'm not going to say that it won't happen because I don't know. We are exposed repeatedly to images of January 6th, of assassination attempts, that it's really at the forefront of people's minds. But when you look at again, our perceptions of people on the other side of the divide, what we see is that we largely overestimate how much people on the other side would support political violence. So Americans overwhelmingly reject political violence. Like overwhelmingly, we want peace and security. We think people in either party think that almost 40% of people on the other side would support politically motivated murder. We think that almost 40% of people in the other political party would support that. In reality, it's 1 to 2%. Okay, it's not zero. So it's not that it's not there, but 1 to 2% is very different from nearly 40%. And of course, fewer people than that would actually participate in political violence. So it's not to say it can't happen, but it's to say when you are encountering somebody who's in a different political party, chances are very small that they actually support political violence. And so I think knowing that might help us to approach those people with a little bit more optimism and openness. But if we treat everyone as if they are on the attack and they're the aggressor and they are going to try to harm us, then we lose that possibility of relationship and connection.
So it's a really powerful point. It's like taking that
Mm.
deep breath and saying, okay, am I feeling attacked by this? If I
Mhm.
can get my arms around the fact that my brain gets me to think that way because I have this old brain, right?
Yeah.
Then it gives me that moment to perhaps process, think through, be more measured, find a way to connect
Yeah.
moving forward, which kind of takes down the temperature. I would like to I know we have your three thoughts and we're going to get to that for a second.
Mm.
Um, but let's talk about social media. I liked how you said that the numbers of people doing good things, not sharing political thoughts on it, is much more highly significant than those that do. And yet we
Yeah.
can't help but feel it is inundated with those that do. It's like our government being determined by our or early, when we select candidates, what are they called again?
Oh, the primaries?
The primaries, which is a
Mm,
very small sliver of our population. So we have a
mm,
system that reinforces a minority representing a majority opinion.
mm, mhm.
How do we work through that? Are there ways that we can make that different other than shutting off our
Sure.
social media?
Well, limiting our social media use is very helpful, actually. And so, uh, and there are a number of ways people will tell me sometimes, like, having trouble sleeping. And I'm like, oh, well, what are you doing right before bed? And they're just doom scrolling. They're looking at all of the news and all of the things happening and the candidates saying stuff on social media. And so one, just don't do that. But we can also set some limits for ourselves. I think it's helpful to be intentional about what are you looking for from your social media. And maybe you want to know like something that the candidate said, or maybe you want to know about something that's going on in the world, or maybe you want to know what Taylor Swift wore in the last concert. There's a lot of reasons that we go to social media. So think about what is it that you want to get out of it, and how long do you want to spend doing that? Maybe you say, all right, I want to spend 10 minutes looking at this, or I like this comedian, or whatever it is you're going to do. Set a timer for yourself. Go do that for 10 minutes and then set your phone down and go do other things. I think the more we are engaging with three-dimensional human beings rather than their social media accounts, the better off we're going to be. So, we don't have to get rid of social media altogether, but like there's this kitten doing the Apple dance on TikTok that I am very, very excited about and just makes me so happy. So I'm like, I'm not going to give up my social media, but I'm also going to try to attend to some things that bring some joy. I'm going to stay informed. We want to be informed. It's important, especially with an election coming up. But I would say get the information you need to stay informed and then get on with your life. So don't just stay in there. Honestly, you're going to see the same thing over and over and over again. Like, how many times have you seen that poll? How many times have you heard that? If it's not going to make a difference for your life and how you're voting or what you need to know, you can actually just move on and go do something different.
I like that. We should encourage each other to do that.
Yeah.
Everybody, thank you for your questions and comments. Thanks, Barry. Let's keep moving on. I want to show and share Dr. Tanya's three things she wants to leave us with. We do this with every one of our guests, navigating the divide. I think this is worth repeating again and giving us any kind of data you had. We are not as divided as we think we are. Everything tells us that we are the most divided ever, ever, ever. And if anybody is a student of history, you can pick any decade in history to see, oh my God, you want to talk about the Civil War, right? Do you want to talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis? There's always been deep divisions. Why now? And why are we better off?
So often when we think about where people stand politically, we think that there are people far on the left, people are far on the right, and there's nothing in between. In reality, sure, there are people far on the left and far on the right, and that's who we're seeing mostly in media and social media. And there's also traditional Democrats, traditional Republicans. Most people, however, are in what we call the exhausted majority. They're in the middle. Yeah, and a group called More in Common did this great study where they named that. They said most people are not on either extreme. And the people who are in the exhausted majority are so tired of the vitriol that they're hearing from the left and the right. And actually, this is what I'm most concerned about. They are disengaging from our democracy. They're not voting. They don't want to have a conversation with people on either side. And it's fine if you don't want to have a conversation, but I think that if we turn down the heat from the left and the right, we can invite more people back into our democracy to participate. Because we really should all feel welcome to participate in our democracy.
I agree with you. Right. Turn down the volume on polarizing input. I think you are encouraging us. I think what you used was avoid doom scrolling, you said.
Yeah, absolutely. If you find yourself stuck in this, paying attention to it. And the thing is that the news, because now I didn't grow up with 24-hour news channels, but now they exist. to keep people paying attention, they have to keep us emotionally activated. And so they're going to keep, everything is breaking, everything is urgent. Turn off the news notifications on your phone. Like, you do not need all of that. Like, every time your phone dings, you're looking at it. It keeps us at a level of emotional activation that's actually not good for our physical or mental health.
Okay, and lastly, this is something we talked a lot about, and I love this. So lean into curiosity. What does that mean from you to us, Tanya?
If we know that we have cognitive biases, that we might be misperceiving people on the other side, that most people are not at the extremes, but more in the exhausted majority and have more complex and nuanced views than we know, hopefully that leads us to want to know more. It's like, oh, what am I missing here? And so that can make us curious either in conversations that we have with other people, or even just how we're approaching our news, our social media, our networks, of wanting to know what it is that we haven't been exposed to that maybe we can learn something more about. And it might not be about changing our minds about an issue, but what if it could help us to change our minds about people who disagree with us on an issue? I think that's an even more important goal to have.
Uh, I agree, and I want to ask all the people who've joined us currently. My guess is everybody's joining because they want to learn more about how they want to connect. But what happens if you just can't get there, right? You just can't. Is it okay to just walk away and not want to navigate the divide? I guess kind of wanting to leave, and I guess in doing so, you'd like to leave the anger behind because if it comes with you, that's not very productive, is it?
It's absolutely okay to not have these conversations. And if that's the only thing we know how to do, if we only know how to move away from and set boundaries, then we're not actually in a very empowered situation. What's much better is if we have the skills and feel some confidence in being able to have the conversations, and we have the skills and confidence in being able to remove ourselves from those conversations when we want. And then we have the ability to make that choice and decide in any given situation, do I have the energy to do that? Is this going to help to achieve the goals that I have? So, really having that flexibility, but that does mean being able to do either one and then being able to make a choice.
Right. We have to make a choice. We have time. Listen, please, if anyone has one question, I have another, but if anyone would like to ask a question or make a comment, please do. Dr. Israel, I know you spent a lot of time on college campuses of late. We read about what's happening on college campuses of late. We hear about this moral inversion. What are you seeing, and what kind of questions are coming from our college students?
So they're really struggling because there are some deep divisions going on. And again, we're hearing mostly from people who uh, have a strong stance on one side or another of an issue. But what I'm hearing people say to me is like, I can see both sides of this, or I really don't know exactly how I feel, and I don't even feel like I can ask. And that's the thing that's really harmful. I mean, I'm a professor, and so I feel like higher education needs to be a place where people feel like they can learn. And what I'm seeing is that people, I mean, if we take the, Israel Gaza, Israel Palestine situation, for example, people are getting very deeply informed, in but usually in a kind of narrow narrative with information that supports that. And other people are getting very deeply informed, but in another narrative, that's a narrow view that also has information that supports it. So it's not that people aren't informed, but they're not understanding how somebody could see things a different way from a moral perspective. So what I would love to see, because we often put our views out there to say, here are my views. This is why you should agree with me, or we'll say, here are my views. This supports my actions or my beliefs. So seldom do we say, here are my views. These are the limits of my understanding of this. Can you help me to understand what am I missing? So if we do that, then we really see other people who disagree with us as a resource for understanding a perspective that seems unfathomable to us.
Right. Wow. Wow. That's a very powerful way to bring this conversation to a close. Let me say thank you. I have lots more questions, perhaps for our next one, if that's okay with you. Right?
Absolutely.
Because we will be on the other side. And I just think it's important with everything going on in the world and with the information changing and being shared as quickly and robustly as it is. I think it's a good time, like on a regular basis, to do these audits with ourselves. Where are we? What are we believing? What are we thinking? Who are we inviting in? How are we listening? What are we consuming? Is it too much? Is it too little? Is it broad? Is it too narrow? All those things. Thank you for bringing that to the fore for us, doctors. We
Mm.
really, really appreciate it. Just want to let anyone know in 2 weeks, we will again be going out to visit with our WOW girls. This time it will be 500 girls in Jacksonville, Florida. If you happen to be listening and are in this area and want to mentor, come walk with these girls and at the same time get inspired yourself. Please do. The date is November 5th, info@genwnow.com. In addition, we will return on November 30th with our next refresh. We're going to delay it a week because we will be with our WOW girls. Our spotlight will be on feeling good by doing good. I love this. It's like now an annual gathering of really understanding and meeting people who are doing such good work and really how good work. I know that our resident psychologist, Dr. Israel, would confirm that when you do good work, it does make you feel good. And it has to do with all of your physiological things aligning in the best possible way. So we will see you on November 13th, where we will see those people and they will inspire us to continue to do the good we're doing in our lives. Please stay in touch with us. This is a wonderful growing community, Generation W. Many ways for you to connect with us. And we love this. This is the good social media. I just want to say that. And a thank you to the amazing Generation W team who continues to march on because they do believe in doing good and feeling good. We will see you on the 13th. Until then, everyone, blessings always.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Israel.